All right, so I don't take up too much of your time. I guess we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Um, for those of you who don't know, my name is Jacqueline Blundell, and as of next week, I will be the Associate Dean of Science for Research and Graduate Studies, formally. Thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge, with respect, the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of the province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you are located and the Indigenous peoples for whom those lands are traditional territory. Welcome to our On the Menu. This is the Faculty of Science Lunch and Learn series. On the menu is a full course meal covering a wide and comprehensive range of tasty topics. In the months ahead, we will intend to offer a variety of these sessions, which we hope will be of interest to faculty and students. So be sure to keep an eye out for the next event. We're also interested to hear your ideas. If you have a suggestion for a future topic, please feel free to submit it via the chat, or you can email us at science@mon.ca. Today, we are discussing your Discovery Grant applications. In this session, the Faculty of Science Grants Facilitation team, Doctors Jennifer Major and Lynn Frizzell, and behind the scenes, Philip McCallum, will review the NSERC Discovery Grant application process, discuss evaluation criteria, discuss and differentiate between initial or internal comprehensive and compliance reviews, and share helpful application tips, and hopefully answer any questions that you may have. Before we get started, although I'm sure we're all very comfortable with WebEx now, but just a reminder to keep your mics off, except for the person speaking. Following the presentation, we are very excited to hear questions from you guys. You can either write down your question in the chat or write question and we can call on you. At that time, you can turn your mic on and feel free to answer or ask your question. I will remind everyone attending that we are recording. And so the video will be made public on our website, as well as the Faculty of Science YouTube channel in the next few days. And so if you know any colleagues who are unable to attend today, but you think would be, benefit them to see this video, please let them know. Okay, so with that, I think I'm done. And I'm going to pass it over to Lynn and Jen to go through the presentation. Thank you, Lynn and Jen, for putting this together. And I hope you all learned something.
Thanks, Jacqueline, and thanks to Philip too, because he put together a lot of these slides. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lynn Frizzell, one of, as Jacqueline said, 3 of the grant facilitators here in the Faculty of Science, along with Jen Major and Philip McCallum. So it's our hope that we'll be able to answer your questions here today. So this session is meant to be a question and answer session, but Jen and I are going to present some information that addresses what we anticipate will be some of the, I guess, frequently asked questions and things that we know are the kind of feedback that we frequently give. So we'll talk briefly about deadlines, the RIG policy, which is the Research Impacting Indigenous Groups policy, addressing EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion in your grant application, how to present your contributions, some tips about the CCV, and that briefly about the leaves and delays and how you can present those. So as Jacqueline said, please interject. Even though we're presenting, please interject at any point in time with your questions at any time. As Jacqueline said, you can indicate, I think there's a way you can wave a hand. I can't see those, but Philip can, I think, or indicate in the chat that you have a question, or just type in your question and we'll read it and do our best to try to answer it. So the first reminder I would like to give is the important dates. The important deadline. So we have 36 NOIs were submitted, so 36 applications that we need to review. And we would like very much to provide a comprehensive review to all of those. So to take advantage of that comprehensive review, please prepare your application on the NSERC and MON Researcher portals. Get those started. You don't have to submit we can see it while it's in progress. And we ask that you do that by September 13th. This is voluntary, but we highly encourage it. And by having it prepared this way, you're also ready then to have a peer review, which is also something we highly encourage you to do. The mandatory deadline is October 11th. It's the policy of the Faculty of Science that no application is going to be submitted to NSERC at the 11th hour. And it is the Faculty of Science that does the submission, not RIS, that has not been read or reviewed for compliance. We want to make sure we're following all the guidelines. So what kind of review do we provide? Some of this is going to be very repetitive. So if you attended in June, some of this is going to be repetitive, but we've tried to pick up the points that we thought were the most important to reiterate. So for comprehensive review, we will give your grant application a careful read. Philip, can you move to the next slide? Make sure that you have addressed everything in the merit review criteria. And we're going to make reference to the merit indicators grid, and we highly recommend that you keep that in front of you while you're writing your application. So we'll look to see that you've highlighted and demonstrated your excellence and your contributions, that you have a well-presented HQP training philosophy and training plan, and that your actions for promoting equity, diversity, inclusion are woven throughout your application. That you've highlighted the success of your HQP as evidence of your own impact and your role in that success, that your proposal is situated well within natural sciences and engineering. So if you spill over into CIHR or SHRC, we can help you to make sure you're highlighting that which is natural sciences and engineering. That is presented as a program of research with a long-term vision and not just a group of projects. You do want to show that you have that long-term vision and long-term goals. That's well organized and structured and mirrors the language in the guidelines and highlights the points that busy reviewers will be looking for. So again, this mirroring the language that you're going to see in that merit indicators grid. You want to use words like long-term goals, short-term goals, objectives. You want to show how your HQP fit into your plan, what your expected discoveries are, the impact that it will have on the field, and how you might address, how these discoveries might address social and economic needs. You might influence policy or technologies and so on. We'll look to see that it's cohesive, that all the parts agree. The example that I always give is that the number of HQP you say you're going to train in your training plan is the same as what's presented in your proposal and attached to projects therein, and for whom you're asking funding for in your budget. And again, the presentation standards make sure that your fonts and margins are correct. It's easy to read, not too jargon heavy, and hopefully catch all the typos. Again, what we may not be able to do is provide feedback on the content. So we encourage you to get a peer review, someone in your field who you trust to provide you with good constructive feedback. The compliance review ensures that you're eligible, that all the sections of the application are complete and included. You're not accidentally submitting a draft or leaving something out. These things have happened. And to make sure that the rules have been followed, that, for example, you're including the contributions and work samples from the past 6 years. So we're working from January 2016 onward. And I'm going to turn it over to Jen now to talk about the RIG policy. Oh, any questions before we do that on that part so far? The review or the submission processes?
Looks like we're probably good to go. Although feel
Okay.
free to put in any question later. You can ask a question even if it's not what we're talking about right now. It's okay. This is supposed to be pretty open and non-formal. Since we kind of alluded to the fact of the RIG policy in June, and we've learned a little bit more information about this policy and how it's going to be used. We wanted to talk about that just a little bit. So the RIG policy is the research impacting Indigenous groups. It's been in effect for a couple of years now. I think it was July 2020. So the RIG, the spirit behind it was to make sure that research that's impacting Indigenous groups is done in a good way. It really has a major focus on relationship building. So this is good for both parties. It's good for your research, and it's good for the Indigenous groups that are being impacted, of course. It's one of many tiny steps that we're all taking and that MUN is taking towards reconciliation, kind of similar to how we do a land acknowledgement at the beginning. There's all these tiny little steps that we can do to make things better. And one thing we really want to say is that this is not meant to impede or delay your research. It's not anything you need to be afraid of. Even as of last year, it was a little bit scarier for some researchers, and we can definitely understand why. We do have a little bit more knowledge and more help over the past years, so we feel that we're pretty well, we can help you. And also it's now it's under review by the new interim associate vice president research, indigenous research, it's very long, AVPIR, Dr. Paul Adji, and we've had really great communications with him, and we know that this is very positive. We've gotten very positive feedback, so don't worry, just reach out to us. Go to the next slide, Phil. The first thing you need to do to comply with the RIG policy is to see if your research even falls under it. Not all research does, of course, but there are 5 different ways you could be impacting Indigenous groups. The first one, and the one that is usually the most common in the Faculty of Science, is research conducted on land. So this pretty much affects many of our faculties that are doing field work. And I would like to highlight that in here you can see that it says research conducted on First Nations, Inuit or Métis land in Canada and Indigenous lands worldwide. I'd like to highlight that Indigenous lands includes claimed lands, and it also includes traditional territories and areas where Indigenous groups may have asserted rights. So it's very likely that if you are doing field work, even if it's not on a claimed land, that you will still fall under the RIG, and talk a little bit more about what you should do if that's the case. The other ways that you might fall under the RIG are perhaps maybe more obvious. Number 2 and number 4 relate to if you are recruiting or analyzing anything that involves Indigenous identity. And number 3 and number 5 basically relate to if you are including any Indigenous identity, Indigenous culture, or knowledge, and that's any factor of your study. If you are unsure that if you fall under this, research can be very complex and it may not be obvious, just reach out to us and we're happy to help you. And if we don't know the answer of whether you fall under RIG, we're happy to reach out to Dr. Adji on your behalf or facilitate any interactions, as that is the current way to move forward now, is to work directly with Dr. Adji and with us. If you do fall under the RIG policy, what you need to do at the beginning is to reach out to Indigenous communities. And at the time of your submission of your grant, you need to get agreement in principle. We'll be referring to this as AIP. So this is basically, you need to let the Indigenous groups that are impacted about your research. Perhaps they may want to be involved in it and they may want to help shape the research. You might find that they don't want to be involved and they say do whatever you want. Or you might even find that sometimes you don't hear back from them. And we're happy to help you if some of these things happen. AIP can come in many different forms, and it's supposed to be based on what the Indigenous group wants. So this could be them sending you an email, or it could be an official letter, it could be texting, it could be lots of different things. We also are aware that there are many Indigenous groups that have a formal policy for obtaining permits. And if that's the case, then that can be considered AIP as well. If they want you to do it a certain way, Memorial would like you to respect their wishes. One of the things that comes up often for many researchers in science is that there's not an obvious Indigenous group to provide AIP. This happens very often when we're talking about traditional territories. As you may or may not know, most of Newfoundland is on the traditional territories of the Beothuk. And if this is the case, and there are some other cases as well, you can ask for acknowledgement in principle from the Committee on Ethical Research Impacting Indigenous Groups, and this is called NSERC, and they can provide that AIP. I would like to state we have noticed that there have been researchers that working with other groups who may be concerned about getting this AIP from a CERC group. And this thing is kind of like a land acknowledgement. It's an olive branch to build relationships with Indigenous groups across Newfoundland and Labrador and across Canada and across the world. And getting AIP does not mean that anyone owns any research or any outcomes of the research. So think of this really as relationship building and just doing research in a good way. And what we want to see and what MUN wants to see is that you have a good start and at the time of your application that you're identifying these groups. So the next thing you need to do is notify MUN about your research that's impacting Indigenous groups. So when you apply for anything on Romeo, you're going to have a kind of new question under ethics and certifications. It's going to ask if your research involves or impacts Indigenous communities. So you can say yes, no, or consultation required. And the next question is basically, what is the status of your agreement in principle? So you could already have it and you could be just attaching it to your program, or it could be that you're applying to CERC. You could have already had a notification from CERC, or it could be that you're still trying to reach out to the groups or you need some help. So if you click one of these, it's all fine. You should say whatever is the truth. It flags your files so that we can follow up with you and so that RIS will follow up in the future. But it does not mean that you will not be able to submit. It means that we're going to work with you and help you to see where you are and what help you need. And I should also say that it could be that your research doesn't involve Indigenous groups at the beginning, and further along, a DG is 5 years long, you may find that it does impact, and you can update this in the future too. So you could start off with a no and change it in the future. And if you need to apply for CERC, you can apply for that on Romeo, the researcher portal as well. Normally you would apply under number 1, which is general use application. But for CERC, you would go to number 3, Indigenous engagement, and you would start a new application for the CERC application, the second one there. And you'll have to input some basic questions and attach your proposal, and you submit online. I'm going to pass it back to Lynn to get back to DGs now, unless anyone has a question about the policy right now.
No questions about RIG? Not yet? Okay, thanks, Jen. This slide is just to remind you that your application is reviewed on the basis of 3 equally weighted criteria. So we've reminded you this before, and we'll remind you again. It's important to spend as much time on presenting your excellence as a researcher, which is where you would do that on your CCV and in your research contribution sections, and as it is to spend on your HQP training, philosophy, and plan, and your past HQP contributions. You have to spend as much time on these sections as you would on your research proposal, because they are, as I said, 3 equally weighted review criteria. Obtaining a minimal rating of strong on all 3 is critical for established researchers, while early career researchers, ECRs, are permitted a minimal of a moderate on their HQP section, recognizing that they may not have had opportunity to develop past contributions to HQP. So on this slide, which I know you can't read, oh, here we go, the grid. These criteria and the scoring scheme are outlined here in the merit indicators grid that I referenced earlier. And as I said, we encourage you to use this guide as you prepare your applications and to mirror the language and the terminology used within it. This is the rubric that the reviewers go back to over and over again when assessing your application. It's the standard against which you are evaluated. So use the terms from the grid so the reviewers can find what they're looking for. The objectives, use the word training environment, EDI actions, use words like original, innovative, socioeconomic impact, if that's relevant, technological advance, so on. Use these words that are there, again, the reviewers can match it directly to the rubric. Are there any questions about the review process, I guess, or the criteria before I move on to EDI? Nothing in the chat? No? Okay. So equity, diversity, inclusion is something that you must address in your application. Most importantly, this will figure into your HQP training philosophy and your HQP training plan, but also in your proposal. So if variables of sex, gender, diversity are applicable in your research and in your methodology, you should include them in your proposal. If you have EDI contributions in the past, you can include these in your past contributions to HQP and your most significant contributions. How do you address EDI in your application? The idea is to show that you recognize that some groups may face greater challenges or barriers to full inclusion and participation in the research enterprise, and therefore they're underrepresented. You need to identify specific barriers or challenges, systemic barriers and challenges that exist in your field and in your institution, as well as in your group, if it trickles down into your group. And then you need to present a plan with specific actions for reducing these barriers and challenges. So it's about identifying and addressing what people need in order to be included in the research and to be successful once they're there. And the next slide shows some examples of the kinds of policies and practices that you can adopt in your group and incorporate into your research and training environments. So one of your targets might be obviously recruitment. That's the first way to increase the diversity in your group. So you might want to consider, these are just examples. There's a multitude of ways that you can address equity, diversity, inclusion. You might consider a broader scope of qualifications when you're recruiting. Instead of just looking at GPA or publications and so on, you might consider other kinds of merit. Someone's life experiences or job experience or curiosity, their motivation. Look at some of these other factors. You and your HQP can participate in EDI activities that are offered by your field, your professional associations perhaps, here at Memorial University. That's a way of reaching a broader group of potential HQP and also becoming more aware of barriers and actions that you can take. You can recruit through broader channels and targeted groups, prepare ads with inclusive language, use social media to advertise positions in your lab, in your group. A nice example might be to set aside funds for HQP with potential, but who may not have the marks, say, to qualify for scholarships, giving opportunities to those who may not have had those privileges in the past. So once you've recruited them, next slide, please, Philip, thank you. You then need to retain them. So to retain your recruits and support their success, you can use any number of strategies to create an inclusive training environment that supports the success of all. Some examples are you might create a formal EDI anti-racism statement that outlines the goals and values of your research group. You can incorporate this with your lab safety guidelines and include it on your website, include it in your actual physical space. You can use individual development plans. This is a way to open up conversation with your students. It highlights their goals, what the career goals are, what courses they want, what skills they want to attain. In that way, you can identify where they want to go and what the barriers might be, and then you're more aware of the things that you might be able to do to help them attain these goals. And that's something you can revisit on a regular basis. You can lead discussions on barriers on EDI in your lab. You can schedule meetings and activities with EDI in mind. So thinking about some of the obligations that some of your students might have, being flexible with this scheduling. Again, participate in training activities and encourage your HQP to do so. There's many things offered on campus, but again, check out in your field, what might be offered. Include people who are underrepresented. Collaborate with them so that they can be mentors to students, so that your students who come from underrepresented groups see mentors as role models within the university and within your group. Keep an up-to-date list of resources for your HQP. We have a list of such resources. In one of our past on the menus, we had many people from across campus come on and discuss the kinds of supports that they offered. So I suggest that you watch that on the menu and check out that guide for all the kinds of resources that you can use and include and encourage your student, give them the time and the space to participate in these things. And collaborate again with underrepresented colleagues. They can serve as mentors for your students. Any questions about EDI before we turn it back to Jim to talk about contributions?
If you have questions after, feel free to ask them again later. It's okay. But move on to contributions. This is another area that we tend to give a lot of feedback on to researchers. I'd like to highlight that there's new NSERC guidelines. We have a link to that at the end of the presentation. And these new guidelines are meant to address that there are many other types of contributions beyond what we normally think of, like papers and presentations, things like that, that are a benefit and a contribution to research and to Canada. And in particular, there's statements on how HQP training, knowledge translation, and equity, diversity, and inclusion, taking steps towards that are very important, and they're recognized contributions by NSERC. So this comes up, or you can talk about these types of contributions in your most significant contributions area, or it also applies to when you're talking about past contributions your HQP have made. They may have done outreach or other things that you could include. You can also talk about this in your additional info on contributions and in your proposal as well, because you're going to talk about the impact and things that are related to your proposal. I would say the biggest thing you need to know is that you need to clearly state your impact and identify the end users. And when we're talking about impact, it could be your field. That's usually the most obvious one, but you also want to think about Canadians, taxpayers. How is this benefiting them? How is it benefiting Canada and its economy? It could be even bigger than that too. There could be international impact as well. I'm going to put in the next slide that Phil's going to show, we have some examples. This is certainly not exhaustive, but just to start making you think about other things. Publications, presentations, awards, editorials about your work. These are things usually most researchers think of right away. You can also include media releases, or if you have interviews, those can be included. When you think about the impact to your field, but you can also think about if you created a shift in the field or uptake by another field. So if you've created a new method or a new standard of practice and another field starts using that, that's very important, and you should definitely highlight that. You can discuss if your work informs any government policies or guidelines that are shared. If industry is interested in your work, if they're uptaking your research, using your new methods, that's very important. If you're collaborating with pretty much any community group, you can talk about that. If you're helping a community to solve a problem, if you create a report together, this is very important and may also be related to knowledge translation. So if you lead to more trust and interaction with the public or a specific community group, this is something that NSERC thinks is very important as well. As I mentioned, a commitment to EDI or accessibility or reconciliation is also important. One thing that researchers may not think of is if you created a new program or a new committee, course, workshop, anything that gives kind of a specialized training for HQP. It could be at your university, for a conference, for society. This is all a major impact to Canadian research. Make sure that you include any service you have on committees. And another one that I think people don't think about a lot is if you create or share data sets. This is very important in the future. Definitely the Tri-Agency is looking towards data sharing. So when I think about all that negative data that maybe sits around, and maybe you're not going to publish it, but there are ways that you can share your data, and that has an impact on other Canadian researchers as well. And sure, what our next slide is. Oh, okay. I don't know if there's some questions coming up in the chat.
Yeah, Jen, one of the questions there, the question there is from Noah about EDI, a list of EDI events. What's he asking for? EDI related workshops at MON. So these would be obviously as they come up. These are often you will find them in the scoop, which Philip works very hard on all week and is distributed through your departmental secretary on Friday. So please read the scoop. There's a section there that highlights any upcoming events and webinars or resources that will be happening at MON and even outside of MON. And we're particularly trying to include EDI related events. Also the Gazette. The Newsline will highlight any upcoming events. The Student Life will, on their website, will have things that are relevant to students and others. And SGS, and I think Jacqueline sent the link to that, SGS EDGE program has many EDI related events.
Yeah, and we also do have a few resources that we can send to you that have links to things beyond MUN as well, like the NSERC EDI guides and some of our tips as well. So we can share that with everyone. Any other questions about contributions or EDI right now? If not, we tend to get a lot of questions about the Canadian Commons CB, which you all at least had to start to do your NOI, so you know that it's a super fun system to use. We just came up with a list of common things that we see or get questions about. One of the top questions we have or things that come up is that you should only list, so this is only referring to your CCB, only list presentations that you gave. If your HQP gave the presentation, then you should not include that in the presentation list. You can highlight these things in contributions your HQP have made, the past contribution section. You could also, if an abstract was published, you could put that in the conference publications section. The next thing related to presentations is that make sure that if you put something under presentation, so you presented this abstract, don't also put the abstract under the conference publications. So you have to pick one or the other. And if you weren't the one that gave the presentation, you should definitely pick the conference publications. Another thing that we run into often is that you should only list HQP that are under your formal or direct supervision, or if you were a co-supervisor, under your HQP, the training of HQP in your CCB. So you should also get their consent before you do that if you're going to be including their name. In your publication entries, you can use an asterisk to identify HQP that are that were part of that publication. You should definitely do that. You can also even do that in your most significant contributions. I see many researchers put an asterisk there as well to show that your most significant contributions have included your HQP as well. Another thing that you should keep in mind is when you're listing the HQP you've trained, don't put in those roles of academic advisor or thesis committee. They might be something that you can select, but you're asked not to include those. If you do want to talk about some of those things, you could talk about it in your training, your HQP training section or past contributions. This might be also important, especially for ECRs who may not have a lot of training experience so far. So if there was any informal supervision or these types of roles, you could talk about them there, but you shouldn't include them in your CCD. One thing we have seen a few times is when you're making your section on awards and funding, don't pick the declined if it was an unsuccessful application. You don't need to include any unsuccessful applications. That's actually referred to if you say you got two different awards and you could only pick one, or you couldn't take it for some other reason, then you would write decline that you were awarded, but you weren't able to receive it. Related to that, there's a question about the portion of funding received for a funding history. So in that section, you are actually supposed to put the dollar amount, not a percent amount. So that's something to keep in mind. And one of the things that we really want to, that's kind of new, is related to leaves. So, well, putting in leaves isn't new. You've always been able to add in an eligible leave. So this would be illness, parental leave, bereavement. I believe those are all of the eligible leaves. Lynn, am I forgetting one?
No, I think you said them all: maternity, parental, bereavement, and illness, your own
Illness,
or in
yeah.
care of someone else.
Right. Yes, family leave. So related to illness of someone in your family. So you should put in all of those. And in your CCV, you can list them. And you can also put in COVID related delays. So those you would list as a special delay. In that section of your CCV, it's going to ask for the duration of the leave. So you need to put in the start date and the end date. You also need to add a justification. So you need to put in the impact that it had on your research program or your training activities. And if applicable, it's always applicable that there's a percentage of reduced time. So for some cases, it might be that you were completely not working on anything related to your research program. So it would be 100% of your time. But especially in terms of COVID delays or other delays, it could be that only a percentage of your time is reduced. So it could be that you think that you were spending about half the amount of time. So you should indicate that. You don't need to include any personal information about yourself or anyone else. You should not include that information. And you don't need to justify illness, parental leave, or bereavement. If you indicate that you had that kind of a leave, it will be taken as that. For the case of a COVID delay, you do need to add a justification in this section. So you need to clearly explain how your research was impacted, and the percentage of time that was reduced. And it can get a little bit complicated in terms of the COVID delays. We do have a resource that we can share that the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences has put together. And they've listed a lot of the dates when there were restrictions and shutdowns at months. So this could be really helpful if you don't remember when things shut down, when you were in the lab, when you weren't in the lab, when students were allowed to come. So that can be really helpful, and we can share that with you if you need help with that. So if you put in any eligible leave, you are able to give a 2-page attachment to add additional information, your contributions. If we can switch to that. Thanks, Phil. So this is where you can list, basically it becomes an extension of your CCV. So normally you can only put things in between January 1st, 2016 to the time of the application. This is the assessment period. If you had an eligible leave, or if you put in a COVID delay in that time, you'll get an extra 2-page attachment, and you could put in a list of publications, presentations, any outreach or other impacts you've had, HTTP training, all these different types of things can go into that 2-page. You don't need to justify or explain any of your delays in this 2-pager because you should have done it in your CCV itself. There could be different ways to calculate, well, there's one way to calculate your supplemental period, but it can be a little bit tricky. So we gave some examples of different scenarios. I would say, especially for the CCV, the COVID delay, that if you have different periods, so it could be that, say, at the beginning of 2020, you were completely shut down. You can put that, and then you can add another, and then you could say, but between, June and September, you were a a little more active. And then say in 2021, you were still impacted, but it wasn't as much. So you can put in all these details there. And you can calculate the total amount of time that you were lost or delayed. And that's how far you can go back in your supplemental contributions page, 2-pager. We have a list of different resources, and there's a couple more webinars that are coming up for NSERC. So we'll be sharing these slides and the recordings with you if you want to have a look at anything. And we'd be happy to meet with anyone one-on-one, of course, if you have any questions and as we're reviewing your applications. So anyone has any questions about anything related to the DG, it doesn't matter how big or how small, we're happy to take them. Or you can always email us if you don't want to ask right now.
So I guess there's a couple of things I'd like to mention. One, thank you, Lynn, Jen, and Phil for putting the slides together, really helpful. For those who haven't been in the NSERC system for the last 5 years or 5+ years, maybe due to COVID extensions and just how your application fell, some of these EDI and HQP training plans have really changed from where the application was. And so I can't overestimate the importance of these sections now, and the resources that Lynn and Jen and Philip have made available, I think will be really helpful. Not a lot has changed about the proposal, at least in my experience over the 4 years sitting on the panel, but certainly the contribution and your most significant contribution section and your HQP sections have really changed. And so I encourage you to read through the guidelines and reach out to us to help. And that's the same with ECRs. We will be able to give you lots of feedback. So there has to be questions. I know it. Don't be shy. Because your applications are due to us in 2 weeks. If you would like comprehensive review. Yes, Chris.
Should by any circumstance we not have our complete application ready in 2 weeks' time, would you be able to look over a partially complete application?
We will do our best to give comprehensive review to all applications when we receive them. If you're working on a part and struggling with a part and you want us to give a partial review, we can do that now. But whenever you're finished and have it submitted, we'll do our best to fit in the best comprehensive review that we can.
So, so how does this actually work? So we load it up into Romeo as much as we've got by your September 13th deadline. Is that what you're saying? And then you guys will take a look at it.
Let us know when you're ready. Let us know when you're ready for comprehensive review, or you can email us parts if if you're working on your EDI section, your HQP training plan, and you'd like some feedback just on that, you can send us that by email. Or when you're ready on the NSERC portal, let us know. So we can access the NSERC portal. You don't have to submit. You can leave it in draft and we can see it. If you have submitted, it's no problem. We can send it back to you to make any edits. So if in the last minute you have a paper accepted and you want to add that to your application, we can pop it back to you. On the researcher portal, it's important that you get that started too, because that's the mechanism by which we get your departmental approval.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And so just as a heads up, you will need approval from, just for policy or procedures perspective, you'll need approval from your department head, as well as approval from me, or the dean's office for submission for your NSERC application. And so you will get that, the department head will get it through Romeo, as well as us. And I will do the final submission at 7 o'clock on the November 1st.
Well-
Hopefully before that.
So I've got a question. This is David Healy in biochemistry. It follows up on what Chris Parrish was asking about. It's to do with the mandatory review. It seems to me that at that stage, the application may still be partial. There may be things missing. So how to deal with that?
Well, we've given ourselves a couple of weeks for that compliance review, because there are 36 to review and only 3 of us. And what we're really trying to do is encourage people to not be late. If everything comes in late, we may not have an opportunity. It has happened that we've had applications submitted to us literally minutes before they're due. And if we can't review it, it's happened in the past. We've submitted those and it turned out to be a draft or something like that. So we don't want to do that. That does not look good for you. That does not look good for the university. And it's in violation of the rules of NSERC. So really what we're trying to do is encourage you to submit as soon as you possibly can.
Okay, thank you.
If we can get it reviewed, it will get submitted.
I mean, ultimately, we don't want to impede your research, right? Our goal is for you to submit the strongest application possible so that you have the highest likelihood of being successful. We cannot submit an application. I cannot press submit if we haven't had a review of it because of eligibility and requirements. And so, but we will do our absolute best to help you. That's our job. That's our goal.
If you submit early, you might even get multiple rounds of help too.
Right. And I can't overestimate the importance of the review. I know I keep saying that because it's true. We were extraordinarily successful last year. I think, 17 or 18 of our 20 returning members were successful with NSERC. And so we really need to, we really hope that our review process helped with that success and picking up on things that you may not be aware of that are really important. And so, yeah, please submit to us early so we can review it. Oh, and for the proposals, I think Jen or Lynn may have mentioned this, but the content for us of the actual, the science behind your proposals, we really encourage you to find peer review. And if you don't know someone, please speak to your department head. And if that doesn't work out, please come to us. We'll find someone for you, or I'll find someone for you. Because that's a really important piece too, but one that we're probably not the best to help with. Anyone else have questions? While the ECRs don't have will likely not have substantial training, previous training, you should talk about your experience that you have had in your training plan, and also get lots of feedback from us or your colleagues about developing training plans. Because while you do get sort of a pass, you still have to meet the minimum of moderate. And so that's also quite important. So please be mindful of that. Ned?
Thank you. I have a question. So if we mention the HQP's name, then we need to have their signatures. That's correct, right? And if I do not mention the HQP's name, but I give a citation of the paper published by that HQP, then the reviewer may be able to guess who is the name of the HQP. So in this situation, should I ask for the signature of HQP or not?
Yes, NSERC, thanks Nan for your question. NSERC does ask that you have consent from all your HQP before you name them on your CCV and application. I'm not sure about the references list. You have a
Yeah,
list of citations there. I guess if they're not linked to your HQP, there's, oh
because
yes, but if you're putting an asterisk on them, it identifies them as your HQP. I guess you can't do that if you don't have permission to do that. You could still include the citation, the article in
yeah,
your reference list, but you could
yeah.
not identify them with the asterisks or name them if you don't have the consent. And it's a good habit for those who are early career researchers who are just getting started out. Develop relationships with your HQP. Keep track of where they are so that you can demonstrate so in 5 years' time when you're applying again for the NSERC DG, you can show the impact that you've had, where they are now, how successful they are, what awards they've won, what positions they've held, and then you can talk about your role and the skills that you help them develop that help them to have that success. So starting early to maintain relationships with them is really important.
Thank you. Because, for example, I said that I trained one HQP, and he has a publication, and I give the publication authors. Then the reviewer may be able to guess the name of the HQP. So, but I do not mention the name of the HQP, but I give the one author list of one paper published with that HQP. So under this situation, should I still ask for a signature from the HQP or not? So,
Yes, you should ask for their consent.
or consent. So I just their consent. So should I upload submit that signed consent to?
You just
answer?
keep,
Oh,
NSERC
keep it.
asks that you just maintain record of the consent.
Okay.
It does not, it's not part of your application.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. That's my question.
Okay, sorry. We got there.
Thank you.
Yes, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this very important webinar. My question is about the role as a co-supervisor for the previous work for the students. In case that we don't get the consent form, that means we cannot include the name. And so is it possible to put just as the master's student or PhD student or summer student that I contributed to the training of them? Is it possible to do that?
Yes.
Yes, you can just refer to them as a PhD student or PhD student 1 or HQP 1. That's another way to refer to them I've seen. Yes, you can refer to them, you just wouldn't use their name.
Their name.
Now,
But even writing like that, that's make it real. I'm just thinking how much they can consider that as a real the co-supervision. I just heard that if you put name and if you get the consent form and then consent and put their name, that makes it more real.
yeah, I mean, we're told as reviewers that if consent was not able to be gotten for whatever reason, then faculty are supposed to, or applicants are supposed to refer to them as HQP1 or HQP2 or
Mhm.
whatever. And
Okay.
so, I mean, I've never had a bias against that. And I've
Oh,
never
okay.
heard that. Now, if all of your, uh,
Okay.
it was like, full
Hmm.
of HQP 1 through,
1, 2, 3. Okay.
40, then that might be questionable. But no, I haven't, oftentimes maybe the person, was your
Yeah,
co-supervisor or
sometimes you
whatever.
cannot get access to them. You cannot. Yeah.
Mhm.
I have another question about EDI. So, I'm just thinking, like when we want to explain like the EDI, like creating this environment, there's only two ways, like talking about my research, for instance, if I'm including male and female in my research, so that's shows that like I'm including like diversity or inclusion, and another just about like HQP, right? Is there another way that we can explain that, or is there other like part of application that we can talk about it?
If you've been involved in things in the past that would be considered EDI initiatives, you can include that in your past contributions to HQP and even in your
Okay.
most significant contributions, either as a separate contribution if it was something quite significant. We had a faculty member who actually included one of his 5 most significant contributions was the tremendous efforts that he made to create an inclusive laboratory and the things that he did. Or you could weave it into your most significant contribution. So if there was outreach as part of one of your contributions, you could highlight it there, mention it as an EDI initiative.
Oh, okay.
Is that what you were asking, Zara?
So for instance, if I was involved in knowledge translation for Indigenous student, so that can be some sort of,
Absolutely, that's an impact, and
okay.
it's an
Mhm.
EDI impact, yeah, for sure.
So
So
you,
even, okay, yeah, hi,
I was
Jennifer.
gonna say, you could put that in your CCV itself, knowledge translation, or it could fit into other activities depending on what it is.
Yeah.
And you can
Mhm.
also, sometimes, you have a couple little things here and there, you're not really sure if it's specifically relevant to a particular contribution, like one piece of research that you were sharing, you could put it into that most significant contributions. But you could also, the additional information and contributions, you get 3,000 characters and you can write quite a bit of, like you can talk about quite a lot of different things in there. So that's, I think, another area where you can really highlight that.
That's an underutilized area.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and when we're referring to HQP, it's also like, so the training plan itself, creating a welcoming environment and reducing barriers, that's usually like the biggest area where you talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
got it.
you can weave that into your training philosophy. You can say that part of your training philosophy is to encourage equity, diversity, inclusion, and encourage awareness and practices among your trainees. You want to create trainees who will go out into the world and do this as well, and weave that right into your training philosophy and plan. And
Okay.
make reference to things that you've done in the past. Say, I know how to do this because I did it before, and this is what I did.
Mhm. And even can I highlight myself as someone like who are like the,
Yes,
yeah? Mhm.
absolutely can. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Since you mentioned knowledge translation, that's something, if you plan to do knowledge translation or outreach or anything related to your proposal, you can put that right into your proposal as well.
Yeah.
Or as an impact in the impact section of your proposal. So there are different ways to just kind of weave it through, and we'll help you too. If we see
Yeah,
something
that's what
that
I
we
was
think
thinking.
you
Okay,
could have
anyway,
put
you
in
are
there,
going
we'll
to.
tell you. Especially if we've met you and we know a lot about what you're doing, or we will try to read your CCV and we see something important in there that you could put in your contributions. That's
Yeah,
why we try to
sometimes.
get it early, and we'll try to, hey, you could have
Mhm.
said this too here. That's
Exactly. That's the thing. Sometimes you don't know where to put them.
Mhm.
So yeah, that really, really helps. Yeah, of course, Jennifer. You get mine. Thanks.
Okay, so that brings us up to the hour, but certainly if there are any last questions, I'd be happy to answer them. All good? Okay, nothing in the chat. All right, well, thank you for attending. I hope you're busy writing. And again, you know, we try to emphasize the fact that we are available to you to help review any parts and of your application to try and make it stronger for you. That's the goal. And so please reach out to us early and often. And yeah, good luck. And I don't know, Lynn, Jen, Philip, if you have anything last to say, any final points to make?
We could talk all day, I guess. I would emphasize what you said, reach out to us early. Of course, you know, there was some discussion about the deadlines. If 36 applications all came to us on September 13th, obviously we couldn't read them all. So we would suggest that you work on it, get it as close to final as you can before you submit it to us. Unless there's a particular section you're struggling with, we're happy to help with. But by having the whole application in front of us and your CCV, we can do exactly the kind of things Sarah and Jen were just talking about, which is we see something in your CCV that could be woven into your past contributions. When we have the whole application in front of us, we can help better with those kinds of things.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And we look forward to reading your fabulous applications. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.